Lattices had, some false starts at the beginning too. Not as many false starts as Ohio State had last weekend, but they didn't have like Aiden Hutchinson staring down their face.
Hello, welcome to Security, Cryptography, whatever. I am Deirdre. We also have our co-host, David. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing great.
Cool. We also have our special guest, Professor Chris Peikert from the University of Michigan. Wait, is it University of Michigan, Michigan University? I don't know how to do this.
It's the University of Michigan.
Okay, good. I got it the first time. Hi, Chris. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be with you.
Yeah.
For my very first podcast, I have to say. So if it sucks,
really?
You know who to blame.
Cool.
Very first, yeah.
Wow, cool. We are blessed, or whatever. Very excited to have Chris Peikert on the podcast today. He is one of my leading voices on lattice-based cryptography, and I am an isogeny-based cryptography fan. I'm an isogynist, but I cannot deny the power, the performance, the capability that lattices give to a lot of cryptographic protocols nowadays. So I can't help but just admit where my favorites, my isogenies, just can't really quite do some of the things that lattices can do with the speed and you can't do fully homomorphic encryption with isogenies as we know of right now. So have to hand it to Chris and all of his research and his collaborators on helping push forward the lattices. I have one thing off the top of my head because I'm mentioning isogenies. You had a pretty cool paper. He gives C sieves on the C side that was using, were there lattices in that Kupperberg-based attack against an isogeny construction?
Well, there are lattices in a couple of ways in that paper that you referenced. Yeah, so they show up even in isogenies. They show up kind of everywhere. You can't avoid them. In cryptography, they've showed up, in the early 90s and late 80s, they were showing up in attacks all the time. And that's kind of how they show up in this, the work that you mentioned as well. But they can be used constructively too.
Oh, yeah.
They show up in factoring RSA as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, like RSA with a small decryption exponent, can be attacked using lattices. And we can talk about that a little bit more. And yeah, so they're very versatile.
For that C-Civ on the C side paper, I just remember it being also it's a good attack, being yet another knock against these class group constructions out of isogenies. And it seems like I'm showing my bias here, but I think the isogeny graph, supersingular isogeny graph based constructions like SIDH and Psych seem to be, people keep trying to cryptanalyze them and they keep getting stronger almost. They keep being, the original parameters seem to be a bit aggressive, so we can bring them down a little bit. Whereas with the class group stuff, like you gotta keep bumping up those parameter sets because of, in part, attacks like this paper. Do you think they're so attractive because you can slot them into like commutative protocols like a regular Diffie-Hellman or anything like that requires commutativity that the SIDH psych stuff doesn't really give you? But it just seems like they keep getting weaker. Do you think there's a hope there, or do you think the structure of these things is just a little bit too much for a quantum adversary?
It's a good question. I mean, the C sieves on the C side, the title kind of picks on C side, but it actually, the attack applies to any of these commutative group action schemes, which, go back to Covenius, unpublished work in the late 90s and the CRS after that. So it's sort of very generic. And it's just kind of using these Kupperberg style algorithms. What was kind of interesting or novel, or I guess hadn't fully been explored before in this work, was that some of these Kupperberg algorithms allow you to do a trade-off between how much memory you use and how many kind of quantum calls to the group action that you use. And a memory, a classical memory, by the way. So the cool thing there was that you don't need qubits, you just need classical bits that you can then access kind of in superposition. So this is a model that has been, used in a lot of the quantum computing literature. And, that kind of memory is a lot cheaper than, general purpose quantum computation, qubits and things like that. So what we showed in that paper was basically by kind of cranking up the classical memory a little bit higher, you can really lower the amount of quantum computation you need. And then it's sort of just a generic trade-off, but we gave some examples like, you can just do like 2 to the 14 group actions with maybe a terabit of memory, something like that. You have to look in the tables, but terabit of memory and, 16,000 group actions quantumly lets you break this thing. So that was very much attuned, very much requiring the commutative structure of the group action. And like you said, like psych and SIDH, they don't have that commutative structure. So there's really nothing to be said that we know of, at least right now, using these Kuperberg type sieving algorithms against them, at least not yet.
Awesome. Thank you.
So for the benefit of the listener, and definitely not myself, who certainly knows what all of these things are, could we maybe define what a lattice is, as well as the difference between, explain the difference between the commutative C-side stuff, the regular non-commutative isogenies, and the lattice-based post.
Right. So this is the commutative property is sort of like this. You have a group action, which is this fancy word for an operation that takes a kind of a scalar value and a point, some other kind of value, and it gives you a value that's of the same kind as the second argument. And so what you can do is kind of the usual like Diffie-Hellman style thing where everybody agrees on some base point, and Alice chooses her own secret scalar, and Bob chooses his own secret scalar, and they apply, the scalar to the base point, and they, trade it off, send it to the other one. And then they can apply their own secret value to the public value that they got from their counterparty. And voila, you have this like Diffie-Hellman type thing where the secret key is now A, and A times B times the base point. And so it's like very much in this style of classical Diffie-Hellman, but with these different kind of structures, not cyclic groups, but rather these weird isogeny things. So, that's both the attraction and then kind of a little bit of the downfall, because this commutative structure, this fact that AB times base point equals BA times base point, that's the commutativity, is what allows you to use these like very cool quantum Kuperberg style algorithms. And, you have to read the paper for that, because to be honest, I forget all the details. It's been a couple of years. But the basic idea is that you can run these cool quantum sieving algorithms, which allow you to get the secret key from the public key in a very cool way. And the commutativity is critical to making those algorithms work. So, SIDH and psych, they don't work that way. They don't have that commutativity. They don't have a group action in the same kind of way. The way that you encrypt, or the way that you do a key exchange, is sort of just fundamentally different in a way that I don't actually understand all that well. Deirdre, you're way ahead of me on that one. But that lack of commutativity is preventing these like sub-exponential attacks that Kuperberg, or quantum attacks that Kuperberg gave.
Yeah, and there's like a hack. Well, the original, before it was SIDH, it was like CRS. It was something very similar, but it was kind of vulnerable to this sort of thing. And then they moved to supersingular curves, and they had a hard time like finishing the diamond of the like key agreement. And the hack is literally to put these quote unquote auxiliary points on your public key. And it's just enough information for you to do this like, commutative math, but it's isogeny math to get to the shared secret, or at least the shared J invariant. And people have been worried that those auxiliary points was enough extra information to leverage for some sort of attack like this to give you just enough commutativity to do something like this. And it's been over 10 years and it's not quite, there's been a couple of little attacks, but nothing really show-stopping. But yeah, it's a little bit of a hack to give you just enough commutativity to come to a key agreement with this ideation psych. But it's not enough to do real composition the way you do with like groups and group actions in classical or, these group action things, which is annoying if you're trying to recreate some of this classical crypto protocols in a post-quantum setting. You can't quite do all of them with psych and with SIDH. Like you can't do Schnorr signatures like with them. But yeah, it doesn't have the same amount as these group action stuff. Lattices, though, are a different beast.
Totally different. Yeah, there's, where to begin on this? I have some pretty pictures. I mean, I don't know if your listenership you have a listenership of tens, if not scores, right? So dozens. All right. Dozens. There are dozens of us. Dozens.
Yes.
So I have some pictures I could put up and just kind of, anybody who's listening only, I pity you and go to the video stream because you're going to have to look at things, but I can kind of talk it through if that would help.
We can toss the links or the names of the figure or the slide numbers
in the show notes.
Beautiful. All right. So yeah, this is kind of like some pictures of lattices. I mean, you don't have to read the formal definition. Like there's a mathy definition in the top few lines, but really it's enough to kind of just look at the bottom here, bottom half, and this middle third, like what are lattices, right? So the integers, just 0, 1, -1, 2, -2, etc. That's the simplest, most basic lattice. So, actually we're teaching lattices to, pre-kindergartners and stuff. Although maybe not negative numbers, but anyway, so more generally, they are in multiple dimensions. Here, here's a lattice in 2 dimensions, and this is just the 2-dimensional integers. So this is a nice square lattice where we have the origin here in the center, and then if you go to the right, you have the 0.10, and if you go up, you have the 0.11, and you can go back over.
We're looking
0.01.
Basically, a dot grid. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And this is like a perfectly square lattice, right? It's like just a tiling of squares. So
and it goes on for infinity.
Forever, exactly. So in all all directions in these 2 dimensions. And if you're a little more imaginative, you can think of the 3-dimensional integer lattice where it's all the points x, y, z, where x, y, and z are integers. They can be any integers. So that's that's the 3-dimensional lattice. And then I'm not very good at even envisioning 3 dimensions, but you go with the higher dimensions, and that's where things really start to get interesting. That's where we use them in cryptography. So like this is a pretty uninteresting lattice, but like here's a more interesting one. This is called the checkerboard lattice or the chessboard lattice. Maybe you can figure out why. Any guesses?
Because it's like the directions that your different chess pieces move.
Yeah, these green points would be like the white squares or the centers of white squares on the checkerboard or chessboard. And then these missing points here would be the centers of black squares. So you kind of have this alternating, white, black, and then shifted. So when you go up, it's shifted over and, white is on top of black and then black is on top of white here and so forth. So, this is a little more interesting lattice, although if you kind of stare at it, you notice that it's actually just a rotation of a square lattice. So if you look at it like at 45 degrees, this is still just a square lattice, but rotated, right?
And to create this, we're looking at basically one of the points in the 2-dimensional lattice being even numbers and the other points being odd numbers, or is that what we're defining?
Close.
Like 2z and 2z plus?
Yeah, close. The rule here is actually that a point is in the lattice if the sum of the coordinates is even. Yeah. So this is 1, 0. The sum is 1. That's odd. So it's not in the lattice. But this is 1, 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. That's even. So it's in the lattice. So this might be called like the parity lattice as well. That's another name for it, I think. So yeah, so that's a slightly more interesting lattice, but still not super, complicated. But in general, you can have really, different looking lattices that aren't square at all. They look more like this. So here, like we have all these, the green points are the lattice points. Again, the gray grid is just for like kind of background. So there's the origin, and then we have these kind of green points that are along this line and then along these kind of parallel lines, but they're, the lines are spread out farther apart than the different distance between the 2 points on the lines, right? Adjacent points on the lines. So this is another lattice, and it's not square, right? If you kind of look at it, you can see these parallelograms kind of, but that's about it, right? There's no right angles anywhere in here. And the question you might ask is, well, what's the rule for producing these green points, right? And every lattice has something called a basis. And a basis is just of some vectors that are in the lattice that generate the lattice by taking integer combinations of them. So integer sums or differences of these. So here's a basis for this green, this lattice of green points. B1 is this vector and B2 is this vector. And if you take, for example, well, this point down here is negative B2, right? And at this point here, pop quiz, tell me what it is.
B1 minus?
Yes, all right. Good, A+. Yeah, so this is B1, and then you go backwards, minus B2, and you end up at this point, right? And so then this one would be like, 2B1 minus B2? Yes, okay, good. So B1, here's 2B1, and then minus B2 gets you to there, right? And then, so every point on this, every green point here can be expressed as integer times B1 plus integer times B2. And I guess I haven't marked all such points because they go out to infinity, right? But you get the idea. So this is a regular structure that goes out forever.
And this sounds like it's a very efficient type of computation for modern processors and arithmetic to do.
Certainly. I mean, we're dealing with vectors. They have typically, when we get to the crypto, they have small integer entries to them. And they're vectors, so maybe they have 14 bits or 16 bits each, and it's a vector of a large dimension, hundreds of dimensions. But when it comes to we need to add up a bunch of these, or add and subtract a bunch of these, that's something that on modern processors is really fast, and indeed that we get really good speeds out of these things.
So how is this different from just the regular vector? If we were just taking a linear algebra course, you'd see the exact same thing. You'd have your vector space and you'd have your, your points or whatever that are basically linear combinations of the basis set, and you'd be doing all your stuff, and we'd just be using the word matrix instead of lattice. So
exactly. Yeah. A great question. Right. I mean, vector space has a basis, right? We even reuse the same words, which can get you in trouble sometimes. But basically the only difference is that the points in the lattice are integer combinations of the basis vectors. In the vector space, they are real number combinations, or more generally field, the coefficients are from a field, maybe finite field or the field of the rationals or the real numbers, whatever, right?
So instead of it's the values are all over a finite field or something like that. That's why they're not the vector space. Or matrices.
If you want to get down to the nitty gritty mathematics of it, a vector space, the multiples come from a field of some kind that you name, and in a lattice they come from the integers.
Do they have to be is it the integers, or is it a group or something, some other algebraic structure? Or
you can use another algebra. You can use the ring of integers of a number field if you're being really fancy. That's definitely something we do. That gives you algebraically structured lattices. But the key point is that it comes from some discrete, it's the discreteness of the integers that matters here. Okay. So it gives you points that are kind of discrete in space. And so it's a discrete subset of a continuous, real space. And so that's really the distinguishing feature, right? That every point kind of is an island unto itself with nothing, continuous.
Now, how do we use this to do cryptography?
Yeah. So, well, here's some, cool pictures. But the main thing, kind of the core problem that we use for lattices, I'll just jump forward here, is, okay, cool. So lattices, like for crypto, you need a hard problem, or you need hard problems, right? You need something that's hard for the attacker to solve, but easy for like the decryptor to solve using some secret key, right? Using some trapdoor or something. So the hard problem, like kind of this most central hard problem on lattices, is this short vector problem or shortest vector problem. And the problem is pretty easy to state. It's just says, I give you a basis of a lattice, like these two vectors, B1 and B2. And the goal is to find a vector that's as short as possible in the lattice, except for 0. 0 is always in the lattice, so that doesn't count. You just need to find a vector that's as close to 0 as possible. And so in this lattice here, this point is the shortest vector in the lattice.
So is this a basis that would change for like be a public key or like a generator?
Yeah, you can think, like in a lot of lattice crypto systems, there's the public key as a basis.
Okay.
And a secret key might be some short vector in the lattice that was generated by the basis.
Got it. Okay.
And that would, you have to be very careful about how you do this, but you kind of have to generate a basis together with knowledge of a short vector or maybe multiple short vectors in the lattice that it generates.
I see.
And so, and that short vector would be, your secret key that's going to let you do some crypto with it.
If there's like a canonical basis to generate the lattice, wouldn't there be a canonical answer for the shortest vector? And it sounds like, well, yes, but the basis is your public key. It's not your public parameter of how to generate a specific lattice.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's over the years, there's been a big improvement in understanding, what we can do with these and how we could design these lattice crypto systems. The most sort of first thing you try or first thing you'll hear in a lot of papers or talks about this stuff is your individual public key is some basis that you generate from scratch, and it's got nothing to do with anyone else's. It's just your own, right? And you generate it, and a short vector in the lattice, or maybe a few short vectors in the lattice, and you put that out there, and you say, okay, go ahead and let's encrypt, right, to me. But there are cool optimizations that have come about with better understanding, where many users can actually kind of share part of the same lattice. So they kind of have a common public parameter, let's say, like a shared bunch of basis vectors, but then there's also, one or two additional vectors which are their own. Right. And the secret key is sort of the short vector that they've kind of augmented onto the lattice. And so that gives you a nice kind of improvement in communication, because your public key is now just what you augmented this common lattice with, right? Just one or two or a few vectors. And your public key is much smaller that way. You don't have to publish an entire lattice. And your secret key is still just, a few short vectors in the augmented lattice.
Is this where like ring LWE and module LWE come in? Are those sort of optimizations of like, you don't have to worry about the whole thing? You're just sort of like inside this particular like group or structure in the lattice. We are tweaking a specific module or a specific ring of like vectors in the lattice or something like that.
Yeah, that's somewhat of a different idea going on in these like ring or module, like algebraically structured lattices. So I guess there's a few things we could say about that. One is that in these like ring based problems, you can publish an entire lattice of your own. You generate and publish an entire lattice of your own, and it's just much smaller in the first place. So, if you look at this diagram here, right, it's in 2 dimensions. You need 2 vectors, right? And each vector is 2 dimensions. So altogether, there are 4, 2 times 2, 4 coordinates or 4 integers that specify this basis, right? But in general, we have to go to much larger dimensions to have any security here. So we're like in hundreds of dimensions.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So in hundreds of dimensions, you need to give, let's pick 500 dimensions just to be concrete. So you need to give 500 vectors, and each vector is 500 coordinates. So that's
coordinate pairs
250,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like 250,000 entries, right? 500 by 500. So that's big, right? Like, and each of those entries is, I don't know, 16 bits or maybe more, something like that. So that's really just too big to do kind of when it comes to, if you want to be competitive with normal crypto sizes of things. So the cool thing about these kind of ring-based problems is you can still work in 500 or 1,000 dimensions, but you only need to give 1 or 2 or a small number of vectors to specify it. And with these ring and module problems, you can specify the entire lattice, like in 500 or 1,000 dimensions. You can specify an entire lattice with just 1 or 2 or some small number of vectors. So maybe 2 vectors, each of 1,000 dimensions, gives you the entire description of this 1,000 dimensional lattice. So you basically save like a factor of 1,000 or a factor of 500 in how much size you need to specify your public key. So that's what these kind of algebraically structured lattices give you.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like computing over these structures is quite fast, but the keys tend to be large, and at least until you start using like a ring-based or a module-based way to like stop sharing literally all the coordinates of a like 500 dimension, lattice or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
What makes this? I'm talking about lattices because they're theoretically quantum resistant against an adversary with a large quantum computer that can run algorithms like Grover's and Shor's algorithm. Can you give us like a core insight to why lattices and cryptographic protocols based on lattices are fundamentally resilient to such empowered adversaries?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the billion-dollar question. We can't really say why any cryptographic problems are secure against whatever model of adversary you want.
Isn't there like a lower bound proof for certain lattice problems that like hardly any other class of cryptographic system has?
So we can say a few things. We could say a few things about lattices, which may or may not be relevant to the cryptography per se.
Okay.
But here's a cool fact. Like this shortest vector problem here is NP hard in the worst case. Right? So this is not a proper, factoring is almost certainly not NP hard. If it were, there would be massive, unexpected ramifications, right? And same for discrete log, and same for isogenies, I think, right? So we don't expect those to be NP hard. We have a proof that shortest vector problem is NP hard in in its exact form. So when the problem is find exactly the shortest vector in a given lattice, it's NP hard. And that's a worst case problem, and it's asking for the exact shortest vector in a lattice. So that's not actually a problem that is used directly in crypto. Right. It's kind of used sometimes as subroutine in attacks. So this can still be kind of giving us some insight. We could perhaps lower bound the running time of a particular class of attacks using the fact that it uses a solver for an NP hard problem, right? Or that needs a solver for an NP hard problem. But these aren't used directly in crypto constructions.
Okay.
What's used
the exact
in crypto
form of the shortest vector problem.
Exactly.
There's other variants.
Right. Okay. So what's used in crypto is this kind of approximate shortest vector problem here, right? So
got it.
I've shown here this blue ball, which is its radius is a lot larger than the distance between the origin and the shortest vector, right? So this is a relaxed problem that says, find me a vector in this lattice which is like within a gamma factor, maybe a factor of 100 or a factor of n within the shortest vector.
And this is where the with errors constructions come from. Is that correct? Where like you have a factor and you may not get an answer that's within that factor.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's directly related to the like with errors class of problems. This notion of like there being an approximately shortest vector that you have to find is, permeating all of lattice crypto, whether it's, LWE or whether it's SIS. So the entire, like, throughout lattice crypto, in order to break a crypto system, you often don't have to find exactly the shortest vector in the lattice. It's sufficient to find one which is like pretty close to the shortest.
Okay.
Or, something like that. So, the actual problem you're trying to solve is this relaxed approximate shortest vector or something of that nature. The flip side of that is like LWE or with errors where there's some small error relative to a larger quantity that's in the lattice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing that makes lattices just kind of amazing is that you can't do everything, but you can do a lot of the things that we've been doing in classical crypto with like factoring and groups and things like that. And you can do that with lattices somehow. But there's also a ton of stuff that you can't do efficiently in classical crypto that you can do much more efficiently with lattices. And one of those is homomorphic encryption or fully homomorphic encryption.
Right.
Why are lattices magical in this regard?
It's a great question. I've given a lot of thought to this. I've worked on this fully homomorphic encryption, FHE stuff. It's been, a decade now that I've been into it. And it's still a mystery, but I think there's one thing I can say that's a bit different from the way that groups and such work, which sort of maybe gives a flavor of why full homomorphism is like not completely insane of an idea, right? Of course, in hindsight, but and it's this, right? So when you think of Diffie-Hellman, your secret is like some scalar, and then you raise a generator to that scalar, or you multiply base point by that scalar, right? So you have a function that takes you from your secret, which is just a scalar integer, to some group. Okay. And that mapping is a homomorphism.
Right.
So when you add two scalars, that corresponds to multiplying the corresponding values in the group. Right? So, we have additive homomorphism and linearity, since the dawn of crypto, and people understand that. But what you don't get is like multiplicative homomorphism, typically, right? I guess you can get it with Pellier, but you don't have additive there. So it's sort of pick your poison. And with lattices, the trick seems to be that the mapping from your secret to the public value, they're both in the integers. So, you have a secret that's some integer vector, and then you kind of munch it up into a lattice, hide it in a lattice. Those are still integer vectors that you get out. And so obviously the additive homomorphism works, that's almost trivial to see. Like if you add the two vectors, they just get added in the lattice and things just work out nicely. But you can do multiplication, right? If you kind of multiply the secrets in the kind of appropriate way, you still get integers out. And that actually corresponds to like a not completely crazy operation that you could do on the lattice vectors as well, that some kind of notion of multiplying them, like it's a tensor product, whatever, who cares? But so the fact that you're mapping from secret integer to public integers kind of preserves both the additive and multiplicative structure of the integers in the secret domain and in the public domain. It's kind of the best way I've found to think about it, but it's still a mystery even with that.
I'm now officially jealous at the fact that they're so almost consistent that like it makes sense that the homomorphism would fall out of the fact that you're not moving very far from the secret domain to the public domain and to what you're operating over. Whereas like in isogenies, for example, it's like there's like a secret scalar, way down in the depths, and on the top it's like curves, but it's secretly isomorphism classes of curves, and secretly it's J invariants, and there's like layers and layers of structure of like what you're representing between what's at the bottom and what's at the top. Yeah, no.
Yeah, that makes it hard to see like what kind of homomorphisms we might have. I mean, you have some basic ones, but not ring homomorphisms.
No,
right?
it's going to be really basic, like commitment stuff and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And like, it'll be some sort of like additive homomorphism. And like the way it's additive is literally, you're going to take a random walk in a graph and like hope you end up at the same place. Like it's really, really cheap and efficient. Cool. So,
and those walks are not even commutative. I will say though, the one thing, you know, that gets you like, so, okay, because you're entirely working with integers, you're getting at additive and multiplicative homomorphism, the trick that you have to get over is that in all these lattice-based encryption schemes, you have this notion of noise, right? So it's like an inexact thing. In order to encrypt, you have to add some noise, and the noise is like completely essential to the security of it. So you've kind of got your message there, and then you've kind of munched it up with some noise and embedded it in the lattice, and that's the ciphertext, right? So when you add to ciphertext, that corresponds to adding the two messages, but also adding the two noise terms. So the noise gets a little bigger. Okay, fine. You make room for it. You make sure there's room for adding two noise terms. But then when you multiply two ciphertexts, it corresponds to multiplying the two messages, but also multiplying the two noises. And maybe the noise times the message and the other message times the noise. So the whole game really becomes, how do we deal with the growth of the noise and making sure that there's enough room? And so that's where like a lot of the innovations in FHE have come about. It's sort of techniques for keeping the noise under control. You've probably heard of bootstrapping, and there's other, you know, kind of more technical things there. But so the game just becomes like, how do we keep the noise under control as we do these homomorphic operations?
Yeah. And so it doesn't just blow up. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Got to talk about the NIST competition. So we're almost at the end. Let's do it. And in the round 3 finalist for
first, can we briefly just explain what the NIST competition is? And I think there's the ChemDem and the key exchange one, and maybe we can say what those are and what the goal is.
So NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, is doing a crypto competition. They've done some of these before. This is how we got AES and SHA, whatever, several SHAs. And because there's been
all the SHAs.
All the SHAs?
Well, not all the SHAs. Okay.
Two of
because
the SHAs.
There's been so much diversity in the post-quantum cryptography kind of literature. They started a competition a couple of years ago to be like, submit your stuff for key encapsulation mechanisms, aka kind of like public key exchange-ish, but not really Diffie-Hellman. It's all kind of squishing it into this chem format. Public key encryption and signatures. Submit your stuff. And it's been years and several rounds. We've had round 3, and I think that's going to be the last round, and we're going to have finalists within the next year or two. And a lot of the round 3 finalists for signatures and chems and public key encryption are lattice-based. There's lattice, there's classic Michelese still in there for the key establishment, and there's some multivariate-based signatures and some other stuff. But like, out of 6 finalists, 4 of them are lattice-based. There's like Saber, Falcon, there's an Entru, and like there's one more.
There's Kyber.
Yeah, we kind of touched on this, but like, why are lattices just kicking everyone's butt?
Well, not only are those the finalists, but there's alternates, right? There's a handful of alternates in each category, and a bunch of those are lattices as well. So there's a lot to like. Well, okay, so why are lattices doing so well in the process? A lot of possible answers to that. One is there are just so many knobs you can turn these constructions. So the lattice-based chems, at least, kind of almost all fall into the same basic design template, but there are about 18 knobs that you could turn in, 360 degrees to go from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
And in the first round, there were multiple more proposals and submissions that set the knobs in certain ways that maybe didn't turn out to be so great.
Yeah.
And those were removed from consideration. But the ones that remain kind of all have, the knobs turned in certain ways. And some of them turn the knobs like really toward like a conservative side where they have like very little, if any, algebraic structure to them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them use, like we talked about, with errors very, briefly. So there's always this notion of error, right? You have to add some errors to get security. The knob is how much error do you add, right? Do you add like a tiny, binary errors, just 0, 1 errors or 0 plus minus 1 errors, something like that? It's about the smallest you could do. Or do you add errors that maybe are, from minus 10 to 10, or maybe minus 1,000 to 1,000, right? There's a lot of different ways you can tune that. And, there are various attacks that apply to certain settings of the knobs. Like if you set the error too small, but you also crank up the number of samples, then all of a sudden everything breaks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, none of these schemes give out too many samples. So should we be worried about the size of the error being small? I don't know. I mean, the attack itself doesn't work as we know it, but we also want to be kind of far away from the
edge,
danger borderline, right? Yeah, exactly, away from the edge. So unless you like, living dangerously.
And really small sizes of all your stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you make the errors really small, you can make the keys and the ciphertext a lot smaller. So you get some performance benefit, but at the cost of maybe some, like, it's not as clear about the security, for example, maybe. If you put a very high amount of algebraic structure in there, as I was talking about before, you can represent, your lattices with just 1 or 2 vectors. That makes things small and faster to operate on. But now you have like a lot of algebraic structure.
Got it.
Or you go to the complete opposite side of the spectrum there and have, very little or no algebraic structure. Now things are a bit bigger, but you have, less algebraic structure that's perhaps available for attack. So, as far as we know, all of the schemes are... Nobody has found any like surprise attacks against the remaining schemes. Like all the attacks have kind of been more or less in the realm of what we've known how to attack these things for quite a while. It's basically like apply your best lattice reduction to this thing and, just crank at it for long enough. And that's what you get. But I think there's a ton of unexplored questions that maybe haven't gotten as much attention as they should have. From cryptanalysis point of view. Yeah. Well, okay. Another knob that there is like, do you use random errors or do you use rounding? Right. So this idea of like with rounding versus with errors, right? This is just like the with rounding we introduced 10 years ago. This idea that you can replace the random errors with deterministic rounding.
Interesting.
Right? Very simple idea, was not obvious. I mean, like 2 decades of lattice crypto went by before this was actually proposed as an idea.
And why is that secure?
There it is.
Because as a systems implementer, I'd be like, if I have a choice, I'm going to put randomness in there, not something that's possibly deterministic every time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the big question. So the idea with rounding is like, you've got some lattice point, you dig some encryption, you end up with some lattice point, and then you're supposed to add some error. And most of the schemes will add some error by just choosing, random error from a small interval, maybe, between plus minus 10 or something like that, right? And that's what they add. After adding the error, that's your ciphertext, and you send it along. But the alternative idea, this with rounding idea, is you have the lattice point, and then you just round it off to the nearest multiple of 10, let's say, right? So, if the number is 37, 62, 45, you round it to 40, 60, 50, right? And these are all multiples of 10, so you can divide by 10, right? There's no, this makes things smaller, right? Instead of having to add error and send the whole thing,
it's encoded.
You just round it off and you kind of just drop the low bits. That's what's going on with that. So, why is this secure? I don't know.
So it might not
in the
be.
paper. as far as we know, I mean, if I had to bet, I would say it's probably nearly as secure as adding a comparable amount of error.
Okay.
But I don't have a great deal of confidence in that. What we showed in this paper, from 2011 was that rounding off a very large number of bits, so like dropping 128 bits or 200 bits, is at least as secure as adding error that's a few bits.
Huh.
So that's not a very useful. I mean, it says if you do a ton of rounding, you're at least as secure as if you did a tiny bit of random error.
Yeah.
But that tells you nothing about how secure you are if you round off a tiny bit of error, right? Do a tiny bit of rounding, which is what a few of the NIST proposals that are still, in the process do.
Interesting.
So I don't know if people have looked super carefully at that. I would like to encourage your listenership to think about, is there a quantum attack against this deterministic rounding? I mean, is there something you could do that makes it faster, speeds it up? I don't know.
If anyone publishes anything and they don't cite this podcast episode in their references, I will be upset and I will find it because I look at everything that goes up on
We're going to go reviewer number 2 on that.
Oh,
and
very.
Just
you can put
it.
anything in an @misc LaTeX BibTeX citation. So just shove us in there.
Exactly. Cool. Awesome.
So I'm trying to get people to pay attention to this question of rounding, because I think it's sort of hasn't gotten enough attention. And, maybe there's some cool cryptanalysis out there for you.
I'm going to pay attention and see. And then I'm going to be annoying at specific locations and be like, why haven't we investigated the rounding, the possible vulnerability? We do not know the security parameters of how much rounding that we're doing.
So typically when people analyze it, they say heuristically, if you round off to the nearest multiple of 10, that's pretty much like adding error, between plus and minus 5.
Love
error.
a heuristic and not a...
Just model it that way. Yeah. But that kind of that says by definition, rounding is just as good as random error. And we're just kind of that assumes away any possible difference between the two. So you once you do that, you're getting security by assumption, which is always nice to have.
All right, I'm going to keep an eye on that ePrint. All right.
One other question about the NIST competition. So they split it up into ChemDem and something else. Traditionally,
Signatures.
when I had thought of chem, key encapsulation, I think of using RSA to encrypt the pre-master secret in TLS. And then after that, I kind of also just gave a presentation that said stop doing that, just use Diffie-Hellman, and thought we'd kind of moved on of doing public key encryption. We'd been using public keys for signatures and public keys for key agreement. So are we in post-quantum world, are we thinking of using public key encryption again, or am I misunderstanding something about the competition?
Yeah, the chem, so the chem is an abstraction. It's just kind of a syntactical contract, right? Of these are the algorithms, these are the interfaces. And the thing about a chem is that instead of picking the secret key explicitly, you run this encapsulate algorithm, is what it's called, encaps. When you call encapsulate, it spits out a ciphertext and the underlying secret key. And when you decapsulate, so on the other side, use the secret key to decapsulate the ciphertext, and it spits out the same secret key that the encapsulator produced. So it's just kind of it's a nice abstraction, actually. It says you don't have to explicitly choose, the secret key or anything. It's just kind of handed to you as an output of the encapsulation process.
Yeah.
And then you use this as a symmetric key for your AES or your authenticated encryption from that point on.
And this is how I think if we had SIDH, and then specifically to fit this API, basically, for the NIST competition. They produced Psych, which does this transform that just does SADH under the hood, and then you do the encryption, the encapsulation, then you check that you did everything correctly. But what was nice that came out of that is there was a known attack against static SADH, and by doing this transform into Psych, the Psych form is resilient to a static attack. So we actually came up with two birds with one stone almost.
Nice.
Thanks for the NIST competition.
Yeah. And you can generically transform a chem into a public key encryption and vice versa. So they're all isomorphic. It's just like, what's the API that these things are supposed to adhere to is the point.
And I think part of it was so many of these post-quantum protocols, like they didn't really match like a public key Diffie-Hellman-esque protocol in general. Like SIDH was kind of the only one that could a theory match like a key exchange or key establishment sort of protocol. All the rest of them were they just weren't formed that way. So leaning towards an encapsulation mechanism fit the broad array of proposals better.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a more natural thing when you don't have this, like, I don't want to say symmetric, but like Diffie-Hellman is symmetric, right? The two parties do the same thing and then arrive at a secret key. That's not how any of these things, other things work. So there's more of there's roles, right? There's like an initiator and a responder type of role to these things.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Why does it matter that Michigan beat Ohio? I know nothing about this.
Well,
everyone was very excited, and I had no idea why.
I'm gonna say hold that question because I want to tell a story first, which was in pure Michigan fan. I want to tell a story first.
Oh man, I can't wait.
It involves Chris because it was in 2018. I was about to defend my PhD. This was about less than a week before the final copy of my dissertation was due. And Michigan had just played Rutgers. And I'm leaving the stadium. It was a night game. I'm walking out via this path that happens to take you past where a lot of professors live underneath the bleachers for the field hockey stadium. And I hear someone say, "Hey, remember in 2016 when we beat Rutgers 76-0? And then again,
78.
Here you go. I hear someone in very Michigan fashion goes, actually, it was 78-0. And that person was Professor Chris Peikert, who I was like, wait a minute, I didn't know you were here too. And he was like, don't you have a dissertation to be writing? And I was like, no, that's not a Saturday problem. So there's no takeaway from the story other than the cryptographers are also at the football games in Michigan.
I remember exactly as soon as you said 2018, I knew exactly what the story would be. Of course, yeah, it was. That was a good one. I think I was there with my son, probably walking back, and he may have been the one who mentioned 76.
Yeah, nothing. I don't know.
Anyway, he had to go up for adoption for that because.
I will say that 78-0 game has my favorite stat line of any football game, which is Khalid Hill, 3 carries, 3 yards, 3 touchdowns. Three touchdowns. Perfect. Yeah, you can't. It's pretty efficient day for Mr. Hill that day. Yeah. So I'll hand it back to you to answer Deirdre's original question, which is why was everybody freaking out on Saturday? For context, we're recording this on Thursday, December 2nd, and we're talking about the previous Saturday when Michigan played
which is still very fresh in our minds and still floating on a cloud about this. So, I have a few stories that may completely bore or mystify the listenership here, but Michigan and Ohio State, colloquially known as Ohio to us, or that team down south, have a long history of rivalry, and both teams are power football Midwest teams, and Ohio State has provided many coaches to Michigan over the years, including some of the most well-known and kind of storied coaches, and a lot of players come from Ohio. There's some players from Michigan go to Ohio State, vice versa. So there's a lot of bad blood. There was a war over Toledo between Michigan and
War
Ohio.
in air quotes.
Yeah, war. Yeah, I mean, how
only
did it
chickens
go? Like,
were killed, I believe, is the common description of it. No, there wasn't.
I think Ohio
real
lost
fighting.
and had to take Toledo, is what I understand was the
depends on
the
who you
outcome of this.
consider winning. They claimed they stole Toledo from us, even though we had it on the map. But in exchange, we got the Upper Peninsula, which turned out to have a lot of useful stuff back then in it, namely iron.
Exactly. So there's a lot of bad blood between Michigan and Ohio, and the rivalry has had its ups and downs between the two teams. So, in the 1969 was this year where Ohio State had like supposedly the best football team in history, right? The very best. And Michigan had this new coach named Bo Schembechler, and Michigan was playing Ohio State. They're the best team ever in their history. And Michigan, they always play in the last week of the season, the final conflagration. And Michigan beats them 24-12 in this new coach's first year. And so, that was just a earthquake to the college football world at the time. So anyway, in the 1990s, which is when I was kind of growing up, seeing a lot of games, these were the best days of the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. There was this excellent coach at Ohio State named John Cooper, who always had really good teams. They'd come in with maybe one loss or no losses at the end of the year. And then playing Michigan, they'd be up and they would just lay an egg almost every time. Cooper was 2-10 and won 2 wins, 10 losses, and 1 tie in his 13 years at Ohio State. And he was basically fired for not beating Michigan. I mean, he had a great record almost every year. And they said, look, you can't beat Michigan, like get out, So in the 90s, there were, these great games that I was able to go to in the late 80s and everything through the Cooper years with, various Michigan coaches. So it was a very reliable win for us. We'd go up against a highly ranked Ohio State team and then just take their lunch money at the end of the year. And it was awesome. So, nice. So around about the turn of the century, the turn of the millennium, the tide turned as well. And Ohio State got in this mode where, kind of all they cared about was to win football games. And they got some really good and also really skeezy coaches. And they got a lot of good players and a lot of good coaches. And it's been a drought. The last win against Ohio State for Michigan was 2003 they won, I think. And they got a win in 2011, but it was this weird year where Ohio State was bad. They had some interim coach. Doesn't even really count. And we barely won that year
Didn't feel
anyway.
right.
Yeah. So basically 1 win in 18 years in this storied rivalry. And so last Saturday, Ohio State is this juggernaut. They're ranked number 2. They had just beaten Michigan State 49-0 in the first half. And then one touchdown. Who cares what happened in the second half? They basically beat them by 49 points, like almost, instantly. And, everybody was like, here we go again, right? Mm-hmm. Another, drubbing at the hands of Ohio State coming up. And then they just destroyed them. I mean, they just flat out controlled the entire game. It was just an old-fashioned beatdown.
Nice.
And they did it in the way that if you were going to make a Homer like feel good movie targeted at Michigan fans, it'd be like, what would we have happen here? Well, we would have it. There's no way they can beat them. And then we would have them beat them in the most old fashioned Michigan way possible, where a bunch of big dudes just hold Ohio State down and we run it up the middle and truck directly into people and they just can't tackle us. Like nothing fancy, none of this spread offense stuff. Nothing. You're not talking
just meat and potatoes.
Like
just push the guys.
Just push
the guys forward
out of the way
until push them forward for 7 yards, 10 yards, 14 yards, and just keep pushing them until they don't want to be there anymore, and then keep pushing them even farther after that. So it was a real win with cruelty type of game. But by the second half, like Ohio State clearly did not want to be there. They were like, oh geez, we don't want any part of this. But they had to finish, and finish they did. Mm-hmm. So that was a really a cleansing moment. And
okay,
it gets Michigan into the first big conference championship game ever, because it started 10 years ago or something. I mean, that's kind of a new thing, but like we've never been.
We haven't been in the championship game because the game itself is new.
And we haven't won the conference in almost 20 years, I think. So it's been a long time in the wilderness here. So we're cautiously optimistic about that. That's the game in 2 days. So whenever this gets posted, people may or may not know the result.
Let's see. I'll try and get it up as soon as possible.
Great.
Cool. Thank you. I'm not a college football person. I'm barely a football person. So I saw everyone freaking out and I was like, oh, there's a football game. Everyone is crying because they Michigan beat Ohio. Okay.
And for, this was the most popular college football game on Fox ever.
Like, in history, yes.
I believe it. In history?
I think 16 million people watched it. It was the number that came out. Something
for
like
what Michigan games just draw people out. They're big money makers. They were just in a random bowl game a couple of years ago against Alabama, and that set the record for most watched college football games since the 2012 national championship.
Oh yeah, Michigan. Yeah,
that's really
versus
weird,
Alabama.
actually.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Like I know shit about football, and I know about Alabama.
Yeah. So this is a weird year for college football altogether. I mean, the teams that have been at the top, the top 4 or 5 teams they're sort of still there, but they're mortal this year. And and so there's a bunch of weird teams up at the top now, and it's going to be more interesting that way. I'm kind of glad to see it. Yeah.
This is a dumb question, but is Michigan D1?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
They can give scholarships.
D1A or whatever the top half of D1 is.
Okay, all right. At MIT, we had a D3 football team, and they finally made it into the playoffs one year, and that was big news because MIT football did not usually do well, even in D3.
Yeah, when I was there, I think we had like one good season when I was there, and it was kind of
probably
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
MIT has a football team.
Yes, it's literally, MIT has a football team. We didn't even realize. Yeah.
And they won a game or maybe 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was...
MIT is very good at sports involving focus, like pistol. They're very good at sports like that. They beat the Air Force and the Coast Guard and the other military forces in focusing real hard and shooting stuff. Not the
biathlon.
Football. Yeah.
Yeah. So my crossover thing, I didn't mention this before, but it's kind of interesting, the history of going back to lattices real quickly. So lattices had an interesting history because the first things that you might consider lattice-based crypto kind of came out in the late 70s and early 80s.
Huh.
And then they all got broken. Because people didn't really know, they just kind of had these ad hoc ideas, we'll embed this kind of structure in there or that and use it for decryption and so forth. And the kind of structure that was added in turned out to be completely devastating, right? Opened it to total attacks. So this nice paper by Andy Odlyzko from the 1990s called, from 1990 rather, called The Rise and Fall of Knapsack Cryptography. Right?
Yeah.
So now it's the rise and fall and rise again of lattice crypto. It just took, it took 2 or 3 decades.
Did you do a talk with that? Or was someone else did a talk with that title?
Maybe. It wasn't me, but it sounds familiar. So anyway, the point is
it was about isogeny. Sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay,
That's the most on-brand mistake that, to the point where I'm not even sure that wasn't an intentional mistake. That was an honest mistake.
Sorry.
So anyway, lattices had there's some false starts at the beginning too. Not as many false starts as Ohio State had last weekend, but they didn't have like Aiden Hutchinson staring down their face or anything. So, yeah. So any field can go from being, dead to rising from the ashes again. With the right ideas.
The class group actions, can't count them out.
Can't count them out.
Awesome.
Just need the right ideas.
I'm always hopeful that, we have a ton of systems that are based on all these classical assumptions, and we have to either come up with completely brand new things which fit the same needs, which is very hard, or we find ways to do them in a, quantum secure setting. And so I'm crossing my fingers that sort of class group stuff could be done in an efficient, secure way. But I don't think we're there yet. Who knows? Maybe we'll figure out a way to do something crazy with lattices, because we can do all sorts of stuff with lattices, such as small, efficient zero-knowledge proofs. And I don't know if that's... I want that, but we'll see.
Small is not the first word you're going to get out of lattices for anything. I mean, they're not big, but they're certainly not small like we're used to with elliptic curves and isogenies, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, although, maybe we're just one or two ideas away from that.
I hope so.
If people want to get into lattice cryptography, are there good places to get started or things to read? Or
there's this great survey by Daniele Michancho and Oded Regev from 2008, which is really accessible. It's not too long. It gives you, the kind of bread and butter basics. It's from 2008, and some things have happened since then in the field, so it's not anywhere near up to date. But nicely, all the key ideas that are in like modern lattice systems, are sort of the same ideas that were present in that survey. So we've just, in that 13 years, we've found like tons of other cool things you can do with the same core ideas. So that's a really nice one to start with. I can always plug my own survey if you're like a grad student wanting to kind of get into the real nitty gritty and the guts of things. You can drop a link to that. It's on my webpage. Yeah, there's,
Is
YouTube.
that a decade of lattice cryptography?
That's what it's called. Yes.
Cool.
Yes. It's also out of date. I think it was published in 2015 or 16 or so.
Yeah.
Still a good deal has happened since then. Yeah, actually, there's a lot of good YouTube videos of the Bar Ilan at a winter school, Bar Ilan University at a winter school in 2012, I want to say, or maybe 2010, somewhere around there. So a lot of good like introductory talks, laying out the main ideas and with a lot of references there. And I think there's a lot of just YouTube videos of conference talks or tutorials and things like that are available. So I find that, I don't know, the millennials like the YouTubes for learning things, which is cool.
Millennials are old now.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to the Z's, the Zoomers? Okay, Zoomers like their YouTubes.
The Zoomers, yeah. I like the YouTubes. I like diagrams and pictures and stuff.
Yeah. This is a very visual podcast.
Talks are good.
Yeah.
Talks are great, especially when you're wanting to learn like the basic ideas. You don't want to get bogged down in all the details of a paper necessarily, but just get the key bearings.
Cool. Awesome. Anything else, David?
I don't know. I just like to say my name is Brian Cook, and thank you for listening to the MGO Blog podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for coming. Sorry for the internet problems. Go Michigan. Is that right?
Very good.
Go blue.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Go blue.
Go blue.
Yep.
Right.
We need it. We got another game in 2 days, and hopefully a couple more after that. That would be that'd be terrific.
Cool.
Thank you for the invitation. This was a lot of fun.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And David, you invited me at like my peak level of, happiness and amenability to agreeing to anything.
Yes.
So, anybody who's still listening,
that's why I did it then.
If you want me on a program committee, I don't know why, but just Michigan's next victory, send me some program committee invitations. And I'll say, yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. We know the way to Chris Peikert's heart. Awesome. Yeah. I'm hitting pause.